So welcome to Lesson Planning Essentials. For quite a few of you, it will be a review. For some folks, I hope that you'll hear something new today that you haven't heard before. I thought about doing this at this time of year as opposed to the beginning of the year because for the undergrads, they're finishing up a lot of their methods classes. And I figured before they go into finals week and they're redoing a lot of lesson plans for their professors, this might be a good segue to hearing some things that might help them boost their grade at the end of the semester. For those of us who are teaching, this is just about mid-year, and I thought it might be helpful to graduates and those who are going into clinical practice to think more intensively about what we're putting in lesson plans, and secondarily, how we're adjusting our lesson planning for teaching in a remote learning environment. So as I'm always preaching to the choir, I'm also preaching to myself. And so in preparing for this, it's made me think a little bit more intensively about what I'm going to do in the spring to always keep things fresh, keep things effective. So I'll be sharing my PowerPoint on and off. I don't do a lot of PowerPointing, but again, to try to archive a lot of what I'm saying and may not be saying, I felt a PowerPoint might be helpful. So let me pull that up for you all. Is there anything other than that? Because I'm always open to adjusting. Flexibility, I think, is good. Is there anything else you would like to talk about or you'd like for me to try to cover during these 90 or 120 minutes or so that I set aside for this morning? Anything in particular you'd like me to spend maybe a little bit more time on? Morning, Dr. Silvers.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Saturday morning to you.
Hi.
So if you think of something as we go along, just raise your hand either on the Zoom hand or raise your physical hand, and we'll squeeze that in. Terry, what are you thinking about?
Assessments during distant learning, if that is possible.
It's possible. It's possible. We probably won't be able to spend a lot of time, but most definitely I kind of touch on it a little bit when we're talking about the objectives. So I think I'll try to make it as applicable to your clientele as possible. Okay. All right, let's dive in. Let's see the sharing screen. So many screens open. Cancel. Here we go. So like I was saying, here's our goals for today. So big goals. And then now we just added in assessment in a remote learning environment, but to sharpen our lesson planning skills for the most effective teaching, to develop more accurate objectives. And Terry, right there, by really looking at how we tailor objectives, that's going to drive your assessment. So always thinking with the end in mind with our planning. So definitely that's going to include some of what you want to talk about. Design lessons that are interactive while promoting higher order thinking and retention of information, which is our big goal in teaching and learning, and then plan lessons that will be effective in both the physical and the virtual classroom. So that's what I'm hoping to accomplish today. I want to start off by looking at an overview of lesson plan elements. I did not want to post a particular lesson plan format because again, it looks like we have all graduates here so far, but I know for the undergraduates, they get really focused on what format are we using? Oh my God, I'm in this district and it's not the format we used at Dominican. And so what I try to drive home in my classes is that there's some basic elements that should be a part of any lesson plan format or any lesson that you may do structured or unstructured. Here are some things that should be included. The only thing that really radically changes is what they're called, right? So, but here's the basic elements. Your objective, boom, most important because that's the backbone of the lesson. It sets the purpose for the learning activity. One of the things that seems to have been a struggle with a lot of my students this semester was just saying what their intention was for the lesson. I'm like, we need to spend less time on using Roget's thesaurus to make an objective sound really beautiful to our professors or to a principal, but to make it very simple, very clear. And I'll say this again later, that both the teacher and the student understands. An objective should not be a secret to the students. They should know. One of the things my mom was reminding me of the other day, she was saying, you know why the principal picked on you so much or was always sending people to your classroom? And I'm like, why? Because I was on the first floor. She said, no, because one of the things she always said when she knew she could take anybody in your classroom at any time. And I was teaching kindergarten at the time. You could ask any child in that class, what are you working on? What does your teacher want you to do? Oh, we're discriminating between these vowel sounds, or we have to find so many measurable. We have to find so many objects in the classroom that start with this sound, or we have to sort and classify by 2 attributes. Well, what does that mean? And so I was like, wow. I thought, well, yay me. I guess that was a good thing. And she said, yeah, from any child. And usually if you have any familiarity with CPS, you know that when we had those walkthroughs, right, you might have 7 or 8 people coming in your classroom at one time. They a lot of times their objective was to find the child in the class that looked the least engaged, right, to try to catch you. And even those kids, she said, they were able to tell something, right, and say, this is what my teacher says we're supposed to be learning. So objectives are key. And again, we want to make them as simple as possible so we can measure them, so they are observable. We'll know when it happened, and the students will as well. The standards, folks hate standards. You either hate standards or you love standards. But what the standards do is help us to stay true with the basics of what we're responsible for teaching at a certain age or grade level. So like I'll say to my students, some people like to start with the standards and look at the benchmarks and say, okay, here's, an outline, I'll say, of what I need to cover in language arts or math or whatever for this whole school year. And in my assessment class, we mapped that out by quarter, by prioritizing which of these benchmarks would be most appropriate for us to cover in the first quarter, the second quarter, based on what we know about the average student at this age or grade level. And then line up, of course, all of your assessments according to that. Others who teach more from a cephalical way, looking at big ideas and then drilling them down to smaller ideas, do better with designing their lessons and designing their units, and then going back and looking at what benchmarks are appropriate and will align with that activity. So I don't think there's any one right way of going about it, but most definitely we don't want to see the standards as our enemy. We just want to figure out how to use them in a most meaningful way for our students. Materials are super important, especially now, again, teaching in a remote learning environment, because not only are we looking at just physical materials, but visuals, right? So what visuals are we providing? What hands-on materials? My student teachers, I wish they were on here so they could hear me saying great things about them. But I had 2 really great student teachers this semester who really went beyond, I will say, what I was expecting by putting tangible materials in the hands of the families that they were working with. They were teaching preschool, if you could imagine doing preschool in a remote learning environment, fully enrolled preschool classroom. So they had 20 a.m., 20 p.m. The PM class probably not as high. The attendance was not as high, but they took a lot of care and attention to think about what did the students need to have in their hands while they were guiding instruction across the Zoom or across the Google Dojo. And so that's something we have to pay a lot more attention to, I think, is what are we using for instruction, the output of information, and what do our students need to be using, right, to help them process the information that we're teaching. Now, our next one, the motivator, which I think
excuse me, Dr. Garrett,
Sure.
someone's trying to get in.
Okay, let me stop the share. Thank you, Alia. Keep an eye on, I'll call it the doorstop on our porch. Sometimes people are knocking at the door, and when I'm sharing the screen, I can't see that. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. Good morning, Sandy. Good morning, Aaliyah. How are you? And we have someone else coming in.
Yeah, good morning. I'm trying to join by phone because I have a problem with the internet.
No problem at all. I'm recording, so if
Yeah,
you need to go back and see something, you'll be able to do that. So no worries. Okay, I'm just glad that you're here, that you made it.
Yeah, thank you so much, because like they need my laptop, like they trying something. I'm sorry, and they could take my laptop in any minute, but I will keep on the phone, like joining you on the phone. Is that okay?
That is perfectly fine. And like I said, later at
Okay.
your leisure, because I know you have all this free time, you can, you can go back and watch what parts of it you missed. Okay. All right.
Appreciate it.
So you guys are watching the front door for me in case somebody else is ringing the bell. And I'm gonna go back to our PowerPoint. Okay, the motivator. This is one that my students and I don't know, there seems to be a lot of confusion. I was about to say in the Madeline Hunter lesson plans of years gone past, this might be called the anticipatory set. So what you're doing before you even start the lesson. It's not the introduction. So a lot of times there is some confusion about, oh, okay, this is just me telling the students what we're going to be learning today. This is even before that, okay? So for example, in my Method of the Creative Arts class the other day, I had a student who had a wonderful lesson around a book about emotions. And she wanted the children to respond to music and paint how they were feeling I was like, oh, wow, I'm so excited about this, how this is going to go. And so her motivator was a game about colors. And she wanted the children to look at different colors and be able to tell the name of the color and where they have seen those colors, either in the classroom or in nature. So now the activity itself was very age appropriate. It did give her an opportunity to see what children's knowledge of colors were they able to name the colors, but it had no connection to the lesson. So I was like, what would have been slightly better would have been to go through the color wheel, if you will, and ask them, when you see this color, how does it make you feel? Or where have you seen this color and what were you doing? Now I'm asking you to listen to music, right? And paint what you feel. That would definitely give some connection for them. We just talked about what colors, how those colors make me feel. Now I'm going to do what? Apply that. So the motivator is a very short activity that prepares students to participate in the activity that's to come. It can be a song, it can be a poem, it can be a video. As in the illustration I just gave, it could be a game. But it should be something to get them thinking, right, in a similar fashion that you're going to want them to do within the lesson. Then you state your objective, right, at the beginning of the method section, which is a detailed sequential description of your behaviors as the teacher and the anticipated student behaviors. So what you're going to be doing and saying, and what you're expecting them to be doing and saying. The very first part of that method section should be just that, sharing the objective in student-friendly language. This is what we're learning today. This is what I intend for you to learn today. This is what we're going to be doing together. Again, it should never be a secret. It should never be a gotcha for the students at the end. And I'm going to show you how this really plays out. And you may have seen this and you may have done it. And every once in a while, this is if I hear it somewhere, I'll know somebody in this Zoom said it. But every once in a while, I'll forget. And I will just start with the lesson. And then I'll get to the end. Okay, now tell me 3 things that you heard about yada, yada, yada. And I've got all these faces and they're re-rolling the tape in their mind and they're struggling to do that. Why? Because I failed to say at the beginning what the intention was for listening. Okay? It's no different than when you go to a movie. I know it's been a long time since we've been to the movies because of the pandemic, but it's no different than somebody asking you after this, oh, I went to see whatever is out, Spider-Man or Aquaman is out. Oh, wow. So do you, can you tell me about the rising action in the movie? Like, wow, and I watched the whole movie and I probably could tell you everything that happened in the movie, but I'm not sure I could tell you about the rising action. Well, didn't you watch the movie? Yeah. Did you fall asleep on the movie? No. Well, why can't you tell me about the rising action? Because that was not my lens. That was not my focus sitting there in the movie theater. It was just out of enjoyment. So I was just watching it. But if you had told me if I was watching it for an assignment, for a class where I had to write a critical review, I would be listening different, right? My processing load would be focused on, wow, I'm looking for the action in the movie so I can identify where the rising action happens. So the same thing here in the method section. So important that we're thinking about those steps in the process. What do students need to know so they can fully participate in this activity? And now to Terry's favorite part, the evaluation, right? The assessment of learning at the end of the lesson. Again, that has to, it has to align directly with the objective. There's nothing worse. And I have a lot of Dominican students who love when I say this. I was like, how many times have you been in a class and you get to the final and you're like, oh my gosh, why are they asking me this? We never did this in class. And that's because somebody is giving an assessment that did not align with the objectives for the course. So I'm using that example because this can happen at any level of learning. It is so important that we align whatever we're asking students to do at the end for them to demonstrate learning. It should correspond with what we said we were teaching in the beginning, okay? So I've changed our lesson plan format again, right? To reflect that the assessment, instead of it being after the method section, is right underneath the objectives. So it helps them to stay true to this. If this is what I intend to learn, or I intend to teach, and I intend for my students to learn, then boom, this is how I want them to demonstrate that they have learned this, or to what degree, okay? And so now, in thinking about that too, Terry, we definitely want it to be something active, okay? I didn't say this about the objectives. I was gonna say it in a moment when we look at objectives in particular, but if we know the objectives should be measurable and observable, meaning that we should be able to see when learning has transpired, and we should be able to measure to what level learning has transpired, then likewise, our assessment needs to be active in that way. There should be some type of demonstration of learning, and that demonstration needs to be tailored to the different levels of learners we have in the classroom. So when we talk about diverse learners, okay, that's something that we hear that verbiage a lot, but I'm not sure that everyone plans necessarily with thinking about the diversity of learners in the classroom. We have language diversity, there's developmental diversity, there's learning style diversity. So we need to consider all of those things when we're deciding on how we want to evaluate whether or not students have learned and to what level. Here's another bone of contention, accommodations. And I'm going to try to stop the talking. I'm ready for us to do something so I don't feel like a hypocrite when I'm telling people to be active and then I'm turning into Charlie Brown's teacher doing all of this talking. So I'm going to finish this slide up and then we're going to do something with this information. Accommodations and modifications. This is another one that that I see students struggle with. Terry, Latrice, Aaliyah, you guys are special education teachers. So this is kind of where you live. But for generalists, they struggle because they automatically think with disabilities in mind. When really the accommodations and modifications section, in my estimation, in my opinion, is about addressing the needs of diverse learners in the classroom, okay? An accommodation, okay, is what you're offering that student, right? So they can fully participate in this activity, in this lesson. Modifications are what you're going to change in that lesson. So said students can all participate in this activity. So The very first thing I ask students to do before they go in and start designing either accommodations or modifications is to look at your objective. And they're like, oh my God, Dr. Garrett, you and these objectives, the objectives, if there's no purpose, if you're not clear about the purpose of the lesson, you can't design accommodations and modifications either. So the exercise is then look at the objective and think, what are all the skills that a student would need to have to meet this objective? What kind of language skills do they need? What kind of motor skills do they need? What kind of cognitive skills do they need to meet this objective? And if they lack those, what are you going to offer them as a tool? Or what are you going to change in terms of how you're teaching the lesson, the language that's being used? What kind of scaffolding are you going to offer in this lesson so that everyone can participate? So it may include disabilities, but for most of us, you're not going to have students maybe with disabilities or identified disabilities in your classroom, especially looking at an early childhood perspective. Most of our students have not been labeled. They may be in the process of being labeled. But what you'll always have in any classroom are different levels of learners. The other thing I assure my students is you need to be tailoring or designing accommodations and modifications for all of your students, because one, you never know at what point in the school year you may have a decision that you want to refer them for evaluation, right? For specialized services. That's number one. And number two, if you have students with identified disabilities, they're going to come with an IEP. And so then your job is to just be in communication with other personnel who is implementing that IEP. Okay. Lastly is extensions. That's a part of our lesson plan. I'm not sure what it might be called in other lesson plans. Dr. Silvers, you can fill me in if you guys have a name for this. But we have a section in our lesson plan which we call extensions. And the purpose of extensions is to plan meaningful activities related to the lesson for students who may finish work early, which really speaks to good classroom management. So you don't have anybody who's just dawdling around. I'm finished, teacher. I don't have anything else to do. And it prevents you just assigning, like I see a lot of teachers do, oh, go to the next page. Just do 2 more. So it's meaningful. It's meaningful. The second purpose of an extension is also to provide enrichment or challenge for certain students. So again, not just doing more, but maybe offering them an opportunity to go deeper into whatever, again, your objective is. So it's meaningful. One of the things that I dislike is when I see in classrooms when we deal with one end of the exceptional child spectrum and we don't deal with the end. So we spend a lot of time and attention on students who may be struggling or have challenges, but students who are at the opposite end of that spectrum who need challenge and enrichment are either a tutor, a peer tutor, they become an unpaid teacher assistant, I will call them, instead of us being creative about meeting their needs as well, so they don't stagnate or regress. Questions or comments about these lesson plan elements? Okay, fantastic. All right, so writing an objective, and then we're going to write one together. Is there anybody waiting on the porch? We don't have anybody ringing the doorbell. I'm just checking before I go on. Okay. All right, so writing an objective, again, like I was saying a few moments ago, state what you intend for students to learn or accomplish by the end of the lesson. Just say it. I said you can always go back and make it pretty, as I'll say. One of the suggestions that I make to students who are just starting out is that's where the standards are handy, because sometimes it's hard for them to put into words what they're expecting to do. They're doing a lot of anticipating because they haven't taught. So they're like, I think this is what I want to happen. So for them, I'll suggest look at the descriptors, especially in the Illinois early learning standards, which we still use at the preschool and kindergarten level before we go into the Common Core. They do a really good job in the Illinois state standards of, after they state the benchmarks, is given descriptors, which are very specific statements about what learning should look like for each of those standards. So I may tell them, or I sometimes suggest, look there for how to verbalize or how to articulate what it is you're expecting students to do. But for the rest of us, it's just a reminder, state it. The other thing I'll say that I don't have here is when you find yourself going and adding the word and, students will be able to do this and that. When you get to the and, that should be a separate objective. Okay, and that's going to make your assessment more accurate. But if you put those ands there, that's going to be hard to measure because there may be some students who can do this, but they can't do that. If you have them all grouped in together, it's going to be hard for you to differentiate what students have accomplished. Again, I can't stress this enough. This is one that I tell the undergrads. This is a pet peeve of mine. If I read an objective and it's not measurable or observable, throw it out. Tell your friends. So when they take this class, I don't have to tell them. So, people started doing that. So they come in, I says, does anybody know how I feel about how objectives should be written? Oh yeah, my friend told me. Well, what did they tell you? It should be measurable and observable. What does that mean? We should be able to see it and we should be able to measure it. Absolutely. And the objectives we're going to write in a minute follow that same pattern. If you can't see it, you won't know it's happened. There's no literal light bulb. So if you read some of the standards, even in the Common Core, my other pet peeve is using the word understand in an objective. Can you see understanding? Never, but you can see demonstrations of understanding. Okay, students will learn. Okay, so we have to be using active verbs that we could actually see occur in the classroom environment. We have to be able to measure so that we're adding some quantifiable words to our objective. How many, how much? Dr. Silvers.
Hi, sorry to interrupt you. This is absolutely
no problem.
fine. My students will know that we're all on the same page.
Yay!
Yay.
I love consensus.
One of the things that we do focus on, and because we're focused a lot on the EdTPA, is on verbs. And so these objectives are verbs, and you mentioned that they're verbs. And sometimes looking at one of the Bloom's taxonomy list of verbs from lower level to higher level is a way to find those verbs and to differentiate for the different abilities and levels. I'm sorry, you were going there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Same page. My page just turned a little slower.
And then those are you can evaluate those, you can assess those. Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. No problem at all. I love that. Like I said, that's why we said when it's been about 2 years, I think, since we did one. You hosted the last lesson planning workshop, and we were saying that then that I think we need to do this so much more. So again, students know it's not just my professor on his or her high horse, right? Just saying it's not something that they made up. Like we maybe actually studied this and somebody said this before us, and we're just trying to.
We're all on the same page. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And because it's the truth, and because it works. So again, we might be saying it differently. We might be saying it at different times, but it's the truth, and the truth does work. I in particular love Bloom's taxonomy. I love telling this story because
me too.
Dr. Benjamin Bloom, who invented the taxonomy of learning objectives, was the dissertation chair for one of my professors at Loyola. And so that kind of freaked me out when I was like, wow, you never think about these people being real people. And so it was like, oh wow. So Dr. Bloom was an actual person. He was like, oh yeah, you would have loved him. And I was like, I'm sure I would have. So that's one of the things that has made me endeared to this. So we're going to look at this since Dr. Silvers brought up the verbs, and then we'll go back to the previous slide. I love this visual. I'll tell you what I love about it and what I don't love about it. What I love about it is that orange circle shows the verbs that we're talking about. They're all active. You can see now there's a few that I would throw out. So for example, if you look at comprehension, you look at relate. So I'll see students use it and I was like, okay, so relating, what does that look like? How will I know that happened? That one is not so clear. So we still have to be careful. This is not foolproof, but it does give you an idea. Most of these, I can see these, right? I can see somebody estimate. I can see somebody predict. I can see somebody match. Definitely, I can see somebody describe. And then can you imagine adding the quantifiable feature to the objective? I want you to describe 3 things about this character. So now I can differentiate performance, right? If somebody gave me one description or one attribute, okay, they've learned something, but they didn't learn to the level I was expecting. So now I know what to go back and reteach. I don't necessarily need to reteach the whole lesson because sometimes that causes fatigue in a student. Okay, I'll give another example. Do you watch TV with people in your family who, if you miss something that the people just said in the program, they'll tell you the whole last 15 minutes of the show. And I get so upset. I'm like, I just literally missed the very last thing the character said. I didn't need to hear what happened since the last commercial. Oh, I didn't know how much you missed. That's sometimes what we do in teaching. Sometimes students don't need the whole unit. They just need maybe what happened on Wednesday and Thursday, right? To help them make that connection. So then they're able to meet that objective when you reassess them. All right. So we need to be, if we've written again the objectives well, then we can unpack where we need to reteach, where the support may need to be, etc. All right, let me go back. Okay. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, writing the objective clear and simple enough for any stakeholder to understand and interpret, especially the student. I say that a lot again in early childhood because most administrators I've worked for had no experience in early childhood. So it was important that they knew what we were doing and also be able to interpret why we were doing it. So like I tell our teachers in pre-service and those who are working, you can't just, oh, students will be able to run their finger through some shaving cream. Now, I may know why that's important, but parents won't know. Well, I don't know. They just playing shaving cream all day. And I guess it's fun and the kids like it. But what is the purpose of that? The purpose is for them to build their fine motor skills. The purpose is for them to have sensory experiences and be, more aware of how their body moves and what effect their body has in the environment around them. That needs to be included in there. Now, using student-friendly language, of course, I wouldn't word it that way. They still need to understand there's a purpose for what we're doing. The objective should be specific, as I was just stating a moment ago, and obviously it should align with selected benchmarks.
Dr. Garrett?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I have a question about the objective.
Sure.
Writing objective. Now, for each lesson plan, whatever we are planning on weekly basis, then after that reflect on daily basis, Monday to Friday, we have standards. And sometimes we have more than one standards that's covered for the unit that we're teaching in that week. Now, what is the ideal situation to write a lesson plan for? How many objectives we should include?
I'm so glad you asked.
Now we have general education kids and we have diverse learners.
Okay.
So if we put many objectives, that means the lesson is going to be very lengthy and the assessment is going to be, I don't know what, because whatever we have an objective, we should have an assessment to measure that objective, right?
Sure.
Okay. So is there like an ideal number for how many objectives a lesson plan for that day on daily basis should have?
Okay, excellent question. And I hope this answer helps you. My rule of thumb is 3. 3 is always the magic number, right? Seems to be education and research is 3. And there's a couple of reasons why. Then I'm going to go back to the assessment, why it doesn't have to be as messy as maybe how you're feeling. And that speaks to differentiation. So 3 objectives I usually recommend, because we should never be spending time like planning a lesson where we're only teaching one thing. And we definitely should be concerned about not just cross-curricular connections. So if I'm teaching a language arts lesson, there has to be some connections to math, science, and social studies there somewhere. For very young children, there should be some benefits to their social emotional development, their cognitive, their language, etc. So for me, 3 objectives not forces me, but it encourages me to think about what other things children could be learning or should be learning as a result of this activity. So that's one about the number of objectives. The other thing you mentioned about the assessments, I have general education students, I have special education students, and everybody in between. The objectives should not change because of who you're teaching. The manner in which you assess them is where there's the difference, okay? So when we talk about differentiating in a classroom, there's 3 things we have to consider. The content, so what you're actually teaching, the process, you may have to change exactly how you're teaching that content, and then the product, which is your assessment. So it may be that here's the objective. I want students to recall the 3 major events in a story. The objective doesn't need to change for all of your students, but how they demonstrate that. There may be some who can tell you. They have to verbalize it. They can't write it. There may be others that it would be better for them to write it if they have writing ability. There may be some that need to use props to demonstrate it and talk it through. There may be some that need to draw that information. The objective is still the same for everybody, but how you measure their learning is where it would be different. You may need to also adjust the objective, so not totally rewrite the objective, but you may say, okay, if I want students to recall 3 events from the story, and that's what I expect most of the class to do, there may be some that you say, if they can tell me 2 things that happened in the story, I think for their developmental level would be acceptable. Some teachers feel like that's dumbing things down, but it's not. You're tailoring it to meet the needs of the students. The objective is still the same. The output and the change in the output is what's going to be different. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Yeah, it's make a lot of sense. Actually, it solve a big problem with me. But I have another question. So when I write an
This was
objective,
going to cost
as you
you.
said,
The
that
first
I
one was
can
free.
alter it in some way, that I'm talking about like the regular ed and diverse learners. So the expected. So when I write the objective, I will say like a student will do 1, 2, 3. However, for the diverse learners, it's gonna be 3, 4. Can I do that or no?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not really, like I said, a whole nother objective. You might put it in parentheses or something like that, because then when you get to the assessment, okay, that's where you're also going to see the difference. This is still the assessment, right? But it may look different for those that you said who are demonstrating 3 and 4 as opposed to 1, 2, and 3. That's super important too, that you keep.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Sure.
That solve a big problem, because we felt that we write like whatever the students gonna do, like with the process, we were writing objectives to match what's in the process, and that's taken forever.
Yeah. Oh, it'll wear you out. Now, the other thing you need to consider with the assessments too is again, how are you archiving that information for your future reference? Because when you have, especially in your case where you know there's going to be a reeval, right, at the end of the year or whatever point that IEP has reached its 1-year limit, you need to be able to show these are ways I differentiated. This is what I have done, right, to support that student. This is the progress I've seen where I was differentiating this way, and now they don't need that type of scaffolding, or maybe they have needed more. Okay, so being as specific as you can in that accommodation or modification part of the lesson plan, what you're doing for said students, can be very valuable when you have to sit down and recall what has changed or what has not changed when it's time for a reeval. Or like I tell my students, or when you're doing the initial request for evaluation, that's going to be key. That's one of the very first things they're going to ask. So what have you done to support this student that you think they need something that has not been offered in the regular classroom?
Thank you so much.
I wish you had one. We have a little time in probably going into the 10 o'clock hour where I wanted to look at some lesson plans. So if you have some that we can work on, I think that'd be great. If you have one you want me to look at and we can kind of work on it together, that's what I was hoping for. So while I'm yinging about something else, maybe you can pull one up on your computer and we could share it. That would be perfect. Sound good? Aaliyah? Come back, Aaliyah.
Yes, I'm here. They want the laptop. I'm sorry. Yeah, what did you say? You
Tell
asked
them
about
you need
the
the
listenable.
laptop
Actually,
for
I
5
don't have
minutes and then
any.
you'll give it
The
back.
one
Because
is in my
Dr. Garrett
desktop
said you need your laptop
upstairs.
for 5
I have
minutes.
a problem with the internet.
They're gonna make me come over there and visit. I think I'm gonna have to come visit and do a drive-by.
You are more than welcome.
You need the iPad or you need the laptop. Okay. All right, so let's do this. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's an odd number. We'll make it work. Here's an activity I like to do with my students, and I hope you'll enjoy it too. Because we're at the end of the semester, I want for you to write an objective, 3 objectives, because you know I like 3. Write 3 objectives for your winter break. 3 objectives for winter break. They have to be measurable, they have to be observable, and they have to be simple enough for us to understand. Okay? So I'm going to give you, let's try 5 minutes, and I'm going to break, let's do 3 breakout rooms and see how that works. And we'll come back together and share your 3 objectives. Measurable and observable, clearly understood. That's fine, Aaliyah. You can talk it through. And we'll come back and share 3 objectives for winter break. All right. Let's go. Let's try, we'll just do 2. We'll just do 2. Okay. See you in 5 minutes. The other group doesn't want to come back. There's always one group. It never wants to come back. Okay, are you all going to each share an objective, or did you choose one person that's going to share for everybody? It's up to you. I'm sorry, you all are still muted.
I think we could probably share one.
Okay, that sounds fine. Let's wait till the other ladies come back. I hope I don't have to go back in the breakout room. Come back. Oh, I remember them Thursday night. They just wait till the breakout room closes on them. And then, then they come back. Latrice and Terry, I was saying, I forgot you. I'll just wait till the breakout room closes before you come back. Okay, everybody share at least one objective, and let's see how measurable and observable and clear they are. Okay, who would like to start?
I can go.
Okay.
I put down a plan goals for the next year.
Okay. So we need some more specificity. Goals for what?
Like my personal goals.
For your life?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. To accomplish what? What kind of goals do you need to plan for your life?
Just make sure I finish school.
Okay.
Maybe also kind of figure out what I can, like financials, what I can discard off, like get rid of if I do certain things, you know?
Okay. So that's two objectives right there. So plan some goals, or plan steps to help myself finish school. We probably need some time constraints on there. I don't want to move into SMART goals, but SMART goals and good objectives do have some connection, right? Because they're specific, there's some time constraints. Again, there's some measurability there. So you're going to plan maybe some new habits to help you finish school on time. You're going to make some financial goals to help you save more money, maybe by a specific time period, or I'm going to change my spending habits so I can save X amount of dollars by this date. Because then you can measure that. You can see that. Maybe just make it even more specific. I'm going to change spending habits. It might be 2 or 3 other things that you're going to change in order to save more money. Maybe where you shop, how much you spend, etc. So as specific as you can make it, you'll know, am I on the right track? Did I achieve that? Because otherwise we can fool ourselves. And I've also have students that can argue with me. Well, teacher, I did do that. And wow, well, the way my objective was written, yeah, but that's not necessarily what I meant for you. What I meant for you to learn was this. So, unless we're super, super specific, we may not even know ourselves if we got there. So great example. Thank you for sharing first. That took some courage and bravery to do that. I appreciate it. Who would like to share next?
Okay. So one of my goals was when presented with a bed, Latrice will be able to sleep deeply for 7 hours a day.
When presented with a bed. See, that means you're not burned out, because at this point, if I was presented with a chair, I probably would still have that same objective. But I like that you were specific. You said 7 hours a day, and you said sleep deeply. So not just nap, right? So you talked about the quality of your sleep, which was really important. Very good. I can see that, I can feel that, and we definitely would know, especially if you wear some type of device like a Fitbit or whatever, that would help you measure it, right? And so then you would know, this is how long I slept and to what depth. Very nice. Okay. I hope that you're able to meet that goal within the first week of winter break.
I hope so too.
All right, email me when it happens. All right, Terry, Sandy, Aaliyah. I'm gonna save me and Dr. Silvers for last.
Okay.
So design a workout routine that includes a minimum of 3 days worth of 30-minute workouts.
All right, very good. Now, I'm going to say what kind of workouts? Are they cardio? Are they strength training?
Cardio.
So what kind of work? So cardio. So that's the only thing I think you need to add there to make it super specific. Because you could just walk around the house and be like, okay, that's my workout. And today I did it. But are you trying to get your blood pressure up, you know, or your beats per minute? You're trying to get your heart rate up. That's the word I'm looking for. Your heart rate up to a certain level or a certain number of reps. So good. Excellent goal, right? Especially as we're kind of sheltered in place still. We need some goals like that, right? So we can fulfill these other goals. Sounds good. All right, Terry, lay it on me.
Yeah, mine is very similar to yours, Sandy, because I gained way too much weight this COVID situation. Mine is with LA Fitness. Terry will exercise on the elliptical for 4 to 5 days, burning 1,000 calories a day. And that really is my goal.
All right, that's good. So you didn't put a time constraint on there. It's just like when you get to that 1,000 calories. So there's your measurement. And you said 4 or 5 days. Okay. You want to commit to 4 days or 5 days?
4 or
Instead of
5.
4 or 5. 4 or 5.
4 or 5. I mean, all right, 4
You
out of
commit to
5. Let's do 4 out of 5.
Just 4. Okay. And
Because
then
if I
guess
get
what?
to
Then you
5,
can always adjust the goal, right? And then increase it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So maybe
Yep.
sometimes it's time to start a little small, just be definitive about it. Say 4 days. Okay. And then now 4 days become easy. You can add that 5th day. So the same thing with our students. Sometimes we might need to lowball it and say, I think if they can give me three facts, I would be happy with that. And then when they get comfortable with that, maybe I can amp it up. Okay. Fantastic. I love it. I love it. We're just getting healthy. We're saving money. These are good goals. We're eating healthy. We're sleeping longer. Oh my gosh, what a group. It's fantastic. Aaliyah, do you have one you want to share?
Her mic is not working. She's having some trouble
not?
with her mic.
Oh, okay. Well, put it in the chat when you get a chance if you can. Because I really want to hear her goal. All right, Dr. Silvers, did you have a goal for winter break?
I do. To cook low carb dinners 3 times a week for 2 weeks.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. You're going to feel so much better. I
Yeah.
love it. Do you have some recipes or cookbooks?
No,
that
I'm
you're
good.
gonna use?
That's a sub-objective, to research recipes, to measure carbs, to do all of those things.
Oh, that's going to be wonderful. Try Pinterest. I found some, no, seriously, that's anytime I'm trying to cook something different. Like right now, that's where I am. High protein, low carb meals. Yeah. I find some of the best recipes on there.
Where
And,
is what was the source? I'm sorry.
it's an app called Pinterest.
Oh, okay.
Pinterest, and you can find almost anything
Right.
you can imagine on there. I
Right.
email it to you. We can become friends on there. And Dieter is on there. She does a lot of decorating stuff.
Cool.
But anyway, but the recipes, I've never gone wrong. In fact, as soon as I master the recipe, then that becomes the thing that my family always wants me to bring.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's taking us away from lesson planning.
Sounds good. Thank you. Okay.
Right. So my goal is pretty simple. Oh, yeah, all recipes is good too. Thanks, Terry. You're right. Allrecipes.com, Dr. Silvers.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
That's an excellent go-to. My goal is simple, is to read 1 book a week that has nothing to do with education.
Right. Good.
So recreational reading, 1 book each week that we're off, has nothing to do with education. That's my goal. And to finish, no, let me clarify my objective. To completely read a book, 1 book each week that does not center around education, right? Because I read something all the time, but I'm not good at finishing the books. So I have a stack of books by my chair and they all have bookmarks at various places within them. I need to finish reading them, okay? So you guys did a very good job. So you see how even in this context, And this is the same kind of thinking that we need to have when we're entering lesson planning, right? What we also had to do, think about what you also had to consider when you were developing your objectives. Time constraints, the time of year, what resources are available. What am I really ready to do? We have to think about that with our students. What are they really ready to tackle at this point in the year, in their development? So all of that background thinking needs to happen before we even sit down and put pen to paper and actually start drafting some objectives. We have to think about the context for learning. And so that's a good segue into the EdTPA conversation that was happening in one of our small groups when they were supposed to be talking about winter break. Was was some of the verbiage on the EdTPA, which we should still keep in the forefront of our thinking, even though it's not on the table as mandatory right now. I love the EdTPA because to me, it is really preparation for the way we should be teaching, right? Always thinking about all of those different aspects, the planning, the actual instructional delivery, and as Terry brought up at the beginning of this session, assessment. And then us always then evaluating and reflecting on what we're doing at each level in that process. So what they were talking about was the central focus, right? So some of the language, right, it's just, it'll have you up all night. The central focus, the central focus. And even though that looks a little different for all of us, depending on your discipline, whether you're early childhood, elementary, or special education, even the secondary students. Here's one thing that I found helped my students to stay focused on the central focus, and that is developing an essential question. Okay, developing an essential question. So instead of having a thematic unit or having maybe a book as the anchor, which to me is still good planning if you're talking about language arts, having an essential question, right, really takes having an overarching theme to another level, because then you're going to shape all of your objectives and thus your activities towards answering that question. Okay, so it's a little bit easier to say, here's what my focus is. Oh, that's a good one too.
That's Aaliyah's goal.
Oh, that's Aaliyah's goal to the 20th. Very specific, very specific. Tell her yay. I love it. I don't know if she can hear me or not. Beautiful goal. So that essential question. And I have some documents I can share with you guys if you want about developing an essential question, but it's an open-ended question that could be answered multiple ways. There's no right or wrong answer to the question, but most definitely students have a number of ways they can demonstrate their ability to answer that question. And so from that essential question comes your objectives, your assessments, which again, align with that essential question. And of course, your objectives are going to align with the essential question too. But so I'll give you an example. A common unit that we have in early childhood is pumpkins, okay, which is another pet peeve of mine. And my students can tell you that. I'm like, why every October I had 12,000 lesson plans about pumpkins. Okay, why should children care about pumpkins? What is it we want children to learn about pumpkins? And so that's one of the areas where I'll push back, develop an essential question. So an essential question is always going to be like a how or a why question. So we're also encouraging higher order thinking, okay? It should be a question that cannot be answered in one day or two. And it should be a question that leads to enduring understanding. So if you're familiar with Grants and Wiggins, right, and an essential question should lead to enduring understanding, meaning across disciplines and across the educational life of the child. So in my case, teaching early childhood, we want to develop a platform or a basis for understanding that teachers can then build on for in subsequent grades. So we're not just asking a question that's good for kindergarten. We want to be teaching the foundational concepts that they'll need to know for later on. If you think about how the standards are set up, that's exactly how the Illinois standards are set up anyway, right? The goal is the same from pre-K to 12. Now, the depth in which we go into that concept is what changes. What's my person? Oh my gosh, I can see his book and can't think of his name. I hate when that happens. The process of education, Jerome Bruner. Bruner calls it the spiral curriculum. Same idea, that we can ask the same question, an essential question across age groups, but the depth of which we expect them to answer that question is going to change based on age and developmental levels. So let's go back to the pumpkin. So we want children to learn about pumpkins. What would we want them to learn about pumpkins by the end of October? So why are pumpkins important? How do we use pumpkins in our everyday life? And I'm just throwing some out there. So that second question, how do we use pumpkins in our everyday life? We could explore pumpkins used for pumpkin pie, pumpkin seeds. We use them to eat. We eat them. We plant them to make more pumpkins. Some people use them for facials. I'm just, kind of brainstorming here. But a question like that is better than just a unit on pumpkins where you see pumpkins on a calendar. And, now we're making a jack-o'-lantern. And then you ask students at the end of the year or at the end of the month, what did you learn about pumpkins? They're orange. You probably knew that day one. So if there was not a big overarching theme about what we wanted kids to learn about pumpkins, say little in, little out. It has to be planned for. There was no focus. It was a thematic focus, but there was no content focus. The essential question is also going to help you do what? Be able to bring in, again, those cross-curricular connections. One of the things Grants and Wiggins talk about when they discuss developing essential questions is just that it should cross domains. It should cross learning areas. So we should not be asking a question that's strictly language arts, strictly social studies, because that's not life. And we also know that students learn best, right? Transitory learning or long-term learning when content is connected. So when we're not teaching in isolation. So that question, how do we use pumpkins in our everyday life? It crosses social studies, it crosses science, it crosses language arts, because there's a lot of terms that are going to come up in discussing pumpkins. I'm not positing that was a perfect essential question. I hadn't prepared to talk about that today, but just to give you an idea of what I mean, it's a big open-ended question. It definitely is one that would take us more than a day or two for students to answer. Could you imagine now, thinking about assessment, how might we assess students' answer to that question? What was the question? How do we use pumpkins in our everyday life? So how could you imagine what would be some different ways students could answer that question? And then I'm going to bring it back to the EdTPA. What are some different ways that students could answer that question, that essential question, at the end of a week or at the end of a month, having spent time with that? How do we use pumpkins in our everyday life? What are some different ways they can answer that question?
Number one is food, pancakes, pumpkin pies. So like a cooking unit on the different types of pumpkin use. And then you can also roll that into your senses.
Okay, so how would they demonstrate that they know the answer to that question? So everything you said is true. We can cook with them, all of that. What context, what activity, how would they demonstrate that they know how we use pumpkins in our everyday life? Could they write about it? Could they, Montserrat?
Maybe they can do like a show and tell, or like a small discussion, or like turn and talk, or just discuss between two students, and the teacher can walk around and kind of listen to what they're talking about.
Okay, or even have a pair of students present that information, right? These are our favorite ways of using pumpkins in our everyday life. or these were our 2 or 3 favorite activities this month of how we use pumpkins. So we said discussion. We said maybe writing an essay, again, depending on how old the children are and what their abilities are. It could be a collage, right? I'm cutting out pictures of the different ways we use pumpkins. We would, how many? Our objectives would make that more specific, right? Students will be able to tell 3 ways that we use pumpkins in our everyday lives. Students will be able to do whatever. So you can, the question is big, but we can make our objectives to be even more specific so we can measure them on the assessment. Okay. So for me, that's what's helped students keep the central focus and also make sure that assessment, okay. Penny, in seminar, I'm sorry, Dr. Silver's in seminar, I have them prepare task 3 before they do task 1 and task 2. Again, with that Grant and Wiggins thinking about backward mapping.
Yeah.
So I'll have to look at task 3, design that assessment first, know how you want them to demonstrate learning. Now plan the lessons that are going to help them get there. That's going to prepare them to be able to do it.
Can they do an essential question for the central focus?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think you just mentioned it. You said this is the essential question that drives the central focus. Always use their language. And I tell students that whatever prompt they have there, use exactly what they're saying. This is just adding in and clarifying how you arrived at that central focus. So you're not changing anything. It's just adding in information, and it's giving some structures there that I think are helpful to students and teachers as well, to try to drive a unit that's seamless between the instruction and assessment. Does that make any sense? I did a lot of rambling, and I'm sorry.
No, it's good. Thank you.
But I hope that helps. That seemed to have helped some of my folks. So we'll see. So we looked at the Bloom's taxonomy already. I don't ever want to leave out us looking at the cognitive, but I did want to spend the rest of this time talking about the psychomotor domain. And that is a part of or I'll say, how do I want to put this? A wing of Bloom's taxonomy that folks don't look at, the affective domain and the psychomotor domain. And for me, I think those are probably the most important at this time. As we're one step removed from our students, I think it's super important that we're thinking about what are we having them do? So they're not passively learning, staring at a Zoom meeting, but that we're requiring them to be more actively involved. In referring back to this, the Ed TPA, in the early childhood Ed TPA, there's a lot of verbiage about active learning. What are you doing to promote the multimodal learning of young children? And by multimodal, getting a little dry here. Multimodal learning, we mean that what are we doing to enhance or promote the use of children's visual, their auditory, as well as their kinesthetic, right, ways of learning, which speaks right to the psychomotor domain. So I just wanted to show these about the cognitive domain, because again, I was hoping to have a few more undergrads in the group this morning, because what I found with lesson planning around the cognitive domain, this is what most students do. They feel like they tell the students something one time. Okay, now I told you, which means I taught it to you, now go do it. And I'm like, where was the modeling? Where was the scaffolding? Where was the we do? So we talk about the I do, the we do, and the you do. But the we do very rarely happens. It's I do, I told you, or I showed you, now go do it. Okay. And so we want to make sure that we're not skipping past that. Also asking questions. I tell my students a lot, I see a lot of game show, I call it game show pedagogy, where we ask a lot of questions of students that they're not prepared to answer. So who could tell me about pumpkins? And then everybody's either looking at you or they're shouting out just a bunch of stuff. And you go, okay, thanks for sharing. Now, here's the activity. It's like, wow, where's the connection? Or why were you asking them about this? Don't get me wrong. There is some pre-assessment that can take place by asking students questions. But what I'm finding is we're either asking questions for questions' sake, we're asking questions that are unrelated, or we're not using the information that students are giving us, or we're asking questions too soon that they're not prepared to answer. And then, oh, come on, guys. I just read you the story. Come on, guys. We talked about this yesterday. Yesterday in the lives of our students could be like 2 years, especially these days. Aren't you guys feeling like days are a lot longer now? They're either like extremely long or super short. But for most of our students, these days are long. Just tell me real quickly as I'm pulling up this slide, what are your remote learning schedules like? Are you meeting at certain blocks of time? Are you meeting longer blocks of time with breaks in between? What is your teaching schedule like?
For me, I am face-to-face, a few hours, and then there's distant. I have a residential facility where they live, where they go to school as well. So on the units, they go to do their work, and then they're also face-to-face with me.
Wow, okay. So how long are you face-to-face?
I do an hour and a half a day with 3 different groups.
Okay, an hour and a half. Okay, all right. That's decent. Latrice?
I'm remote, so my students are middle school, so they're 60-minute blocks. And so they go to reading, to social studies, so they transition to each class for 60 minutes.
And how much time in between?
They have a 5-minute transition time
Whew.
to get to, so they go just back to back.
Wow. And then so how many 60-minute sessions are they doing a day?
Let's see, I haven't thought about that. I think it's 6 sessions, 5 or 6 sessions.
So that's a lot. I don't know if I could do that. And so when we're saying middle school, so like, for example, the preschool that my student teachers were doing, it's 40 minutes on, 30 minutes off, 40 minutes on for the AM. And then they repeat the same thing for the PM session. And even that is tough, that yeah, it's tough, but it's a good amount of space in between. Sometimes that works well because they come back refreshed, and sometimes it doesn't work well because they're like, oh, are we gonna do something else? Like they have an assignment, a little activity to do in between with their family or whatever. So sometimes they come back and they're really motivated to share, and then other times, what else are we gonna do today? And so then we have to sit down and talk about why. Is it the lunar eclipse? Is it what you asked them to do? Were they prepared enough to do it? Were the parents prepared enough to do it? Again, kind of going back to the objectives again, not only do we have to make what we're doing clear to the students, but to the parents, right? And grandparents that are in the background. If they're clueless as to what we're expecting and what we want them to do, children are not going to be able to accomplish that. We also want our kids to be motivated to be able to work on their own. That's always, to me, the goal of teaching and learning, that they've actually learned it when they can activate this knowledge independently. So what has happened in that learning space for them to be able to do that, even to very small degrees? We want them to experience success. And so the more that they're doing, right, less of us talking, more doing, they'll be able to do that. The other thing that I'm sharing before we look at the psychomotor domain is I think when teachers change their mindset from being teachers to coaches, your teaching is going to look different. And again, in this hour, I think that's super important. If you notice, if you've ever been part of athletics, or if you can think back to a gym class, your gym teacher didn't do a whole lot of talking. All right. If you've ever had a personal trainer, they don't do a lot of talking. Right? They tell you, hey, we're working on the quads today. I want you to do this. And they demonstrate. Here's the quad exercises. All right, come on. Stand side by side. We're looking in the mirror. Let's do these quad exercises together. Okay, they give you some feedback on your performance. Let's try it again. Okay, perfect form. Now I want you to do 2 sets by yourself. That's exactly what our teaching and learning should look like. Tell them what the objective is. This is where we're going for today. This is what I know you're ready to do. Let me show you. Okay, let's do a little bit together. Okay, you almost have it. Okay, I need for you to do this one more time this way. There's the feedback. Perfecting the performance. All right, now do a few by yourself and you give more feedback. There's your assessment. That's what our teaching should look like. So look how little talking there was. There was maybe 10%, maybe 20% teacher talk, 80% activity. That's what we want to work towards. Okay. And most important in this, like I said, in this remote learning environment, you're less talking, more doing. So let's look, I'm going to skip over, I think I'm going to skip over the cognitive stuff because you guys know that pretty good. If not, it'll be in the PowerPoint. So you can take it off of there. But what I liked about the those few slides that I had, it was just how to, I'm gonna go ahead and show them just real briefly. What I liked about these was, I think they do a good job of showing how we can set up, again, assessments as well as activities for each level of Bloom's taxonomy, okay? In the cognitive domain, and you're gonna see the same thing manifest in the psychomotor domain. I wanted you all to look at these too for you to see how we stay at the lower end of Bloom's taxonomy so much. So I want you to think about some of your lesson plans. If you don't have any that you could pull up today, I want you to go back and look at them when you're planning for next week, or if you're not planning anymore till January, and look. So much of what we do is at the lower end of Bloom's taxonomy. Oh, what do they know? Do they have some comprehension? And that's it. Very rarely do we get to application, and super rarely do I see analysis and evaluation. Okay. I also see, here's what sometimes I see. Sometimes we go to application and analysis before we've done anything with knowledge and comprehension, which is what I was saying a moment ago. We're asking students to do things with information that we've barely covered. We definitely haven't taught, we've mentioned it, right? We may have shown them one time or two, but we really haven't fostered their comprehension of it before we're asking them to do information. So a lot of times we see teachers, wow, I really ask a lot of higher order thinking questions, which is good, but have we done the preparatory work preceding this for students to be successful at these higher levels? Okay, so I like these slides because to me it was good at showing what those different levels are and what kinds of questions, prompts, etc., demonstrations of learning we should be planning as students are going through the process. This one I also thought was cool as a visual. Is showing what kinds of activities you'll see the verbs that they're using at each level. What kinds of ways could we have students demonstrate their learning at these different levels of Bloom's taxonomy? So that one I thought was cool. That one, if we ever get in a classroom again, you might want to print that out and hang it up. I was like, I kind of like that. So the psychomotor domain of Bloom's taxonomy, this one I want to think is the Davis version. There's a couple of versions that have been written. I want to say this is Davis, which was first introduced in 1970. And it looks at how we require students or learners to use their physical, sensory, and motor involvement in the process of learning. And it should happen at varying levels, okay? So you wouldn't have, like if you think about driver's ed, you're not gonna put a student in the car the first day of driver's ed, okay? But what do we do to have them involved? They use simulators, right? They don't do a lot of it anymore, but they use simulators. So the student is actively pretending to drive before we put them in an actual vehicle. Their physical, their sensory, and their motor skills are involved in that learning process, okay? So what we should be thinking of when we're planning our lessons is what are students doing, not just at the beginning of a lesson to the end of a lesson, but also thinking on a weekly basis, how involved are they from Monday to Friday? So I want you to think about this taxonomy in both of those instances. How am I involving students from the beginning of a lesson to the middle of a lesson to the end of a lesson? And what does that look like also from Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday to Thursday, Thursday to Friday? Here's another reference to EdTPA. A lot of the language that you see in there that, again, to me, I think really does a good job of preparing future teachers for education or for instruction is they ask the student to describe how these lessons build on one another. So if you think about Bloom's taxonomy in the cognitive domain, as well as the psychomotor domain, there's going to be some relationship between each lesson because each lesson is requiring a little bit more involvement of the student, a little deeper involvement, and therefore a deeper processing of the information that's being taught. This is the best way, involving the psychomotor domain, involving students physically, is the best way to achieve deeper learning. Okay, meaning that information is being transferred from their short-term to their long-term memory, where they're able to use that information in various settings, right? And as they apply new information to the schema that's formed in these present activities, it's essential. The affective domain, which we're not going to talk about, I'll probably tie that in spring, is the affective domain is involving the emotions. And that gets really heavy. It's like, how do I make students care? Or how do I influence them or inspire them to care about what's being taught? Number of ways we can do that. But this, to me, getting them physically involved first is something I felt was a little bit more tangible that you probably could think about and apply a little bit quicker today. And the affective, we may talk about another time. This is another way of illustrating how important getting students physically involved is. If you look at how little is retained just from reading or being read to, observing something, maybe about half of that information is retained. But look how much information you could retain by participating, by being fully involved physically and doing. We know at the cognitive domain what the highest level of evaluation is, then you really taking on the role of an expert. You really know something when you can teach it to somebody else. So the same thing we see here, doing a dramatic presentation, simulating the real thing, doing exactly what it is you've been taught. For you to be able to take that on as an expert means you know it, and demonstration and actually doing it is a huge part of that. Okay. Another benefit of teaching in the psychomotor domain is you have students who are more actively involved and invested in the lesson. They're going to exhibit less off-task behaviors. So much of the time we lose students when they either don't know what to do or we're not giving them something to do. That's something I stress a lot in my clinical practice seminars. If you don't give students something to do, they will find something to do, okay? And so usually then, what are you doing? Because I don't know what to do. Either your directions weren't clear or you just said, okay, talk amongst yourselves about what? I've even seen it happen, in some of our classes. You know, and my colleagues are talking to me. People won't talk in the breakout sessions. Why won't they talk in the breakout sessions? Or why aren't they talking about what you want them to talk about? Because you weren't clear. You didn't give them something to do. You just said, turn and talk. Or what are we turning and talking about? And what are you holding me responsible for at the end of these 5 minutes? Right? So we still know we can go off subject just because teachers are probably the worst about following directions, right? And because we also don't get a lot of recreational time just to talk, but we can hamper that by being clear of giving the responsibility for learning to our students, okay? So here's what let's do this. Stop this, and we're gonna do, I'm gonna show you an example, and bear with me. All right. I want you to observe me. Okay, at the very lowest level, there's some observation in the psychomotor domain. I want you to observe me making the letter A. I'm gonna make a letter A for you, okay? I'm gonna take my marker and I'm gonna start and I'm gonna make one line down. Oh, it's a little bit of a crooked line. And I go back to the top and I'm gonna make another line down. And I stop. And then I'm gonna go to the middle and make a short line across, okay? Now, I want you to trace. My marker got messed up. Hold on, guys. I want you to make a letter A just like I did by tracing on top of my letter A. Okay, can you do that for me? As soon as I get it here. Okay, get your finger ready. Still got to talk to the students, right? So they'll stay with me.
You're
All
good
right.
using the whiteboard. It's hard. I can't do that.
Ryan, and this is what I was showing that, okay, so now I want you to put your finger on the screen and trace my letter A, just like we did it together. Get your finger up, let me see your finger, and we're on the screen. Go to the top of the A and follow that line down, stop, very good. Let's go to the top of the A again and make our second line down. Are you tracing my dotted line? Very good, and stop. And now we're going to the middle of the A and make our short line across. Let's go. Boop, and stop. Perfect. Look at you. You made a letter A with me. Now I want you to try with your crayon there at your table and you make another letter A by yourself. I'm going to make one on the screen while you're making one on your paper. So let's talk it through together. I'm going to start at the top and make my line down and stop. Okay, take your crayon, go to the top of that line, and let's make another line down together. Ready? Let's go. Down and stop. And now let's go to the middle of that first line, and we're going to make a short line across. Ready? Get your crayon. Let's go across, short line across, and stop. Put your crayon down. Can you show me your paper? Can I see the letter A that you made? And let's see what it looks like. Very good, Terry. You did a good job. Wow, that's such a great letter A. I like the way you tried, Sandra or Sandy, and give some praise. They're probably gonna look nothing like a letter A, but it was surprising. They get pretty close. But you notice, if we were in the classroom, I would have had kids come up to the board and do it with me, and probably would have held their hand or whatever. But trying to give some kind of tactile experience with them, even in a remote learning environment, touch the screen. Their parents are going crazy because they don't want them to touch the screen. But touch the screen. They're involved. I've given them a model to follow. So that model was still there on the screen. So even if they were writing it on their paper, I messed up. Go back to the screen. Come on, let's trace our letter A again together. It's right there on the screen. You can't go wrong tracing with your finger, right? You can't make a mistake. So that's giving them building their self-efficacy. You can do it. And you can, how many times can you practice that? You practice it as many times as you want. Give some more time. So thinking about how can we do the same things in a remote learning environment that we would do in the classroom. It's going to take some creativity. So now they've done the letter A on their paper. Now I'm going to make the invitation. What else could you use to make the letter A? Could you use a marker? Could you use a piece of paper? Could you use some clay? And so I will let them choose. Obviously, having had this conversation the day before with the parents of, making sure they have some materials available. We talked earlier about the importance of materials. So nobody's sitting there at that particular time, I don't have any, my mom won't let me have, so there obviously some preparation is going to be needed for that. But that is what you just saw as a demonstration of increasing levels of physical involvement with the student. At first it was observation, but that was a very small part of that mini lesson. The observation was very short, about 10 to 20%. Most of that was them writing. I skipped over the air writing. Sometimes I'll have them air write and then trace the letter on the screen. Now copy with me, now do it yourself. But the majority of that small lesson, the students were what? Doing something. It was very little watching, very little watching. Okay. So let me see. I went too far, too fast. All right. So these are the things I want you to think about as you're planning, thinking about I think I passed. Here we go. This is the screen I wanted you to look at. And then I'll go back to that. This is what the taxonomy looks like in the psychomotor domain. Is first getting the learner ready, okay, getting them ready to be actively involved. That's the I do. Here's the we do at these two levels, the guided response, okay? I want you to copy me. I want you to imitate what I'm doing. Now at that slightly next level where we're expecting a little bit more responsibility for them. Now I want you to display what I did. Show me the proficiency of what I just showed you. So now I can give you some feedback of how you can make that, in like our last example, how you can make your letter A a little bit better, a little bit closer to the example that I've given you. Now at these highest levels, not only did I ask them make their own letter A, but now can you make that letter A using some other materials? Okay, can you create something new based on what I've demonstrated for you, based on what we've done together? But if you notice, again, just like what I demonstrated for you, this is the only part, this very first level is where the student is passive, where they're not physically doing something, but they're mentally taking in information. So it's a total shift from how we normally teach. We do a whole lot of talking, a whole lot of modeling, and they're sitting there waiting for their turn. So we want to flip that thinking. Do some modeling and explaining now, immediately. Okay, let's do a few together. I usually tell my students, plan for 3 examples. 3 examples you're showing them, 3 examples you're doing together. Okay, so that's a lot of practice in a very short span of time. That's the psychomotor domain in a nutshell. Is getting kids active early in the lesson, throughout the lesson, and up until assessment. Let me go back. Okay, let me show you this and then we're going to do something together. So I want you to think about this when you're—
Share the screen. Can you share the screen? I think we lost the screen.
I did. I know. I'm just looking and talking. You don't know what I'm looking at. Thank you for letting me know. All right. So these are the things I want you to think about when you look at those levels, is unpacking the steps in the process of learning a skill or a concept. Again, that's something we have to think about a lot as early childhood teachers, because we teach so many firsts. So we can't make any assumptions about what we think students may know or what they should know. We are always considering that they have never seen or never done this. So it's important that we think, what do they need to know beforehand? What do they need to see? And what kind of support do they need from us to make sense out of something that we kind of do, naturally? We have to think about what are those steps involved in doing that. And so now, as a part of that, consider what scaffolding is required for the students to acquire each step. What do they need to see? What do they need to hear? What do they need to feel or touch to get this? Okay, that's definitely going to speak to diverse learners. right? Whether that's their physical ability, their cognitive ability, etc., or just like I said, life experience. Okay. So for example, there's something really simple that a lot of times teachers assume that a child would know the front of a book versus the back of a book. That's something that has to be taught for a lot of students who may not have had literacy experiences before they come to school. But a lot of times teachers will overlook that. Next, this can unfold, these steps in the process may unfold within a lesson, right? So thinking about those steps that I just did, creating what the letter A, something you've been doing for 100 years. I got to unpack that. What do they need to know to make a letter A? They need to know each part and how to make those strokes and where to place their pencil or their crayon. So that can happen within a lesson. And you also need to think about what does that look like in the course of a week? So like I was saying a moment ago with the EdTPA, how do these lessons build on one another? What am I showing and telling them on Monday that's going to equip them for Tuesday? And I'm also connecting the dots from Monday, reminding them, again, not a quiz show. Who remembers what we did yesterday? Teacher, would you just tell them? Tell them. Yesterday, we did X, Y, and Z. And now today, guess what? We're going to use that information and do this with it. Stop being a quiz show. I hate that. I'm sitting in a lesson like, so who remembers what we did yesterday? Then when nobody answers, the teacher wants to get mad. Oh, you guys weren't paying attention, which is another pet peeve. When I hear people say that to children, no, they were paying all the attention that they had. Did you give them something to hold, right? To hold that attention, okay? If you're unpacking this over days and throughout the lesson, what you'll notice is the gradual release of responsibility, I like to call it, from teacher to student. And that's what we should be aiming for, is the release of responsibility for learning from the teacher to the student being able to do something or handle something independently. That's our goal. Piaget calls that accommodation, right? So there's a cheat. I thought I would have some undergrads in here preparing for the content test. I'm like, there's Piaget for you, right? So you're learning something and then you've learned it so well into whatever to a certain degree that you can now use that information in another setting and be able to attach new information onto that. That's ultimately the demonstration of learning that we're looking for. And that brings you all the way back to what the objective conversation that we had at the beginning of this session. So what I was hoping is if somebody had a lesson plan or maybe some objectives they were working on or wanted to maybe reshape, and we could look at them. If not, I'm always willing to do that at another time. But we did have time to do that. Did anybody have one? A lesson plan example or something that you were thinking about revamping or might need to revamp? Montserrat?
I have one, but I'm looking for it.
Okay, that's fine. Take your time.
It might be complicated because it's for educational psychology class.
We love complication. We love
And
complicated.
I think if you look at it, it's kind of hard because I had to do 2 lesson plans.
Mm-hmm.
And then for myself, I had like one. So the whole idea is that I have a classroom, second grade class. The child, there's one student that has autism, and it's the beginning of the year.
Okay.
So my goal is to teach students, the whole class, other than that one student, first, when the student's not there, about differences, and then introduce autism. I have them watch a video, we read a book, we discuss differences between us. And then the other lesson, it's for that one student who has autism. So it's a basic lesson, and the only thing that my goal is for him to build relationship with one student that he started to build a relationship with at the beginning of the year.
And that's the objective for him.
For him only. So one
Mhm.
lesson for the whole class, the other one is just for him.
Like, what's
Because
the objective for the class?
for the I guess my main goal, that's the thing with this lesson, it was more about preparing the whole class for the rest of the year, because they are gonna have to be with this student 70% of the time every day.
Okay, so what did you want? So what did you want them to learn? So what did you want them to know?
To learn about what autism is and to understand other people's feelings and perspectives. That was what I incorporated in the standards. So like I said, it's kind of my first time doing this. I've
Oh,
only
it's
done
good. I think that's very brave and something that needs to be done. I think that sometimes we don't plan for it. I think people have those talks, but are not really clear. Again, which was what I was asking, what are your goals? What do you want them to come away with and be prepared to do? So you want them to be able to describe or define what autism is. Okay. You want them to be able to, we can't use the word understand, but you want them to be able maybe to describe the feelings.
Oh, I put
that-
recognize.
Or recognize.
Do you like
Right.
me to share? I mean, it's probably not correctly.
Did you want to share the screen?
If you like, I can do that.
Yeah, sure.
Let me
And
see.
so we have about five or so minutes. Let's do that. That's what makes it a workshop. We got something to work on. Uh-oh, we lost her.
Sandra, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
You could share your lesson plan from this class, from our class.
Oh, sure. Let me just
Hold on. Let me give you co-host privileges. Montserrat, she's back.
Oh,
Oh,
she's
she's back?
Yeah, she's coming back in. The lesson plan blew you out the Zoom. Oh my God.
Just forget it.
Are you okay? All right. I said, oh no.
Okay.
Like all of a sudden she was gone.
I don't know. I clicked share and it kicked me out.
Oh, wow. Okay, hold on. Let's try it again. And then we're going to take a look at yours. And we're going to take a look at Sandy's and then we'll close. Okay.
It's okay. We can share Sandy's if you like.
Oh, now she was, really?
It's okay. Okay, let me try.
Okay.
Here it is. Are you able to see it now?
Okay, yep.
All right.
All right. Okay, so talk us through.
I guess I should change my name of lesson because I think there's a paper that I had to write about and then attach the lesson plan to, so it explains it more. But the video that describes what autism is really good as for second grade, and it's really specific. So that I name it, that's the name of the video. And then recognize the feelings and perspective of others, and students will be able to accept others' differences. Then I had to incorporate a theory. So I included Vygotsky's theory.
Perfect.
I haven't finished this, but there's I have to add more materials like the book that I wanted to add in there. It's Just Ask by Sonia Sotomayor, which also introduces a lot of disabilities. It's a great book. I love that book. And then I guess it's best if I had the other. It doesn't really make sense because I have to explain a lot. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. We're our own worst critics. Okay. So you said it was in process, so that's fine. Okay. I see a lot good here. Scoot up so we can see the I do, we do, you do. Okay. New class rules. Okay.
So I should be more specific. definitely.
The second objective, yeah.
Yeah, I need to be more specific, include more
So like
descriptions.
my thing for the second one, you want them to demonstrate that. So like you have for the you do, apply what they have learned. So then that means that's what that objective needs to be, that you want them to apply acceptance, right? Apply what it looks like to be accepting of classmates or others with differing abilities, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
you want them to show you that.
Got it.
Not just and also like I said, describe it. So it may be that maybe they're writing out some instances where they would need to show acceptance, and then you have them demonstrate or act that out. This is second grade.
Yes.
I think that would definitely be appropriate for second grade.
Got it. Thank you.
That be a role model. That's not something that you're going to see in the short term. That would be, like I said, maybe a long-term goal. But the I do, show the video, read aloud.
Yeah, so I guess like and part of that is just because students with autism, it's beneficial for them to have like a buddy or somebody that, you know, they look at another student and how they operate during the regular classroom. So it's more likely that the student will be able to look at them and kind of follow along. So that's kind of what I was trying to reach with the be a role model, like just kind of let students know that they can help Caleb feel welcome and part of the class and teach him by just doing what they do about their days, and not kind of like instead of like if Caleb is the student is supposed to, like, let's say it's not staying in line when they're going to the library because, you know, he just wanders off or goes this way, that way. A student can simply just be like, hey, come on, follow me in line.
So then that sounds, so let me jump in here. So it sounds like then another objective is that you want them to be able to name specific strategies of how to support, right, a peer with autism.
Okay.
That's what you're saying. Because you want them to know these strategies so they can do them. And that goes deeper and it's more specific than just accepting. So the acceptance is a part of that process, but more importantly, you want them to be able to do this in these particular ways.
Got it.
All right. So I would narrow down what those strategies are. Is it 4 key strategies for supporting a peer with autism or whatever that is? So enumerate it, quantify it. So again, you'll know it when it happens. That may be what you want them to, that part of that you do, or it may be included in that we do, that is what's being added to those classroom rules. I'm thinking that if you already have some existing classroom rules, you're adding some things that are going to, to make it easier to, influence the environment, to make it conducive for Caleb.
Yeah, we created an anchor chart at the beginning of the year together, and then we're gonna add other things, and I'm hoping them to add like be patient, be kind, those type of things to that chart as well.
Okay, and make sure those are observable too.
Yes.
Okay, so like, so what does that mean to be, what does that look like to be patient? Is that waiting your turn when someone's talking? Is it offering help or asking if someone else needs something before you take the last of something? So even with I was like old people too, but definitely with younger kids, you want it to be concrete so they know when we're teaching kind of soft skills, they call them, we have to be specific about what that looks like. What does kindness look like? You know, because I might feel like I'm being kind just because I didn't push you down. But what do you mean by kindness? So let's put some descriptors on there so they will know when they're doing it and they'll know when they've achieved it. Okay. I think you got a very good start. Anybody else want to add anything? I love that you are planning this and not just saying, oh, we're going to sit down for 15 minutes. I'm going to show this video. We're going to talk about it. And so you can see how you can miss things if you don't sit down and plan for it. So I'm glad that you're, actively saying, I'm going to intentionally have a substantive conversation and hold the students responsible for activating these things in the classroom environment. I wish I had an award to give to you, but I'll just give you my McDonald's cheer. Ba, 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 ba. I'm loving it. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It made it, it gave me really good ideas of how to keep going on this. Thank you.
Wonderful. Good. I'm glad we can help. All right, Sandy. No worries.
Okay, can you guys see that?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So my lesson plan was a literacy one for 5th grade. And so the central focus was on morphology. So students would be able to use morphology to define unfamiliar words. I only have 2 objectives, which are students will be able to define and infer meaning from the nonfiction text Baby Lucy, the fossil of an ancient child, is found in Ethiopia using morphology. So this is just an article from Time for Kids that is kind of like the center of my lesson. That's what I'd be focusing it on. And then my other objective is students will be able to define a word by identifying prefixes, roots, and suffixes. So I have my standards and then my function verbs, which are identify, define, and infer. And then my vocabulary kind of centers around the specific content. So I'd want them to know the definitions to morphology, prefix, suffix, root, or base word, to decompose a nonfiction. And this is a lesson that I actually got to partially teach for a fifth grade class virtually with students I'm observing.
Nice.
So I got to kind of like, I didn't get to finish it just because we were short on time, but I did get to introduce it and kind of work on it a little bit. Obviously, I wasn't able to assess them with like exit tickets that I had designed, but you know, whatever I got to work on them on with them was pretty much like the point of it, the beginning. So for my hook, I opened by asking students if they knew, ideally I'd be in, you know, physically in class writing it on a board, but just disrupt, dismantle, export, and restructure, just kind of asking them like what they think these words mean. And then this
What
is,
did you show it? So what did you just sent it to them?
I wrote it in the chat.
Okay.
And
All
so,
right.
you know, it was all words that they'd heard before, but they were not familiar with. Like they obviously, which is expected, were not able to really define them for me. And so I then introduced them to the concept of morphology and then how they can use it to kind of uncover unfamiliar words. And so that's when I told them that that's what we'd be working on today with the article. And then we read the article, and then I kind of broke the words down for them. So I showed them the same 4 words and how I broke it down. Dis as a prefix means away, rupt as a root means to break. And I kind of did the same with all 4 words.
All right. Now, how did you do this?
So this, I was able to share my screen and show them this exact chart.
Okay, one at a time.
And yes, so I did one at a time, and we kind of spent a few seconds per word and just kind of I focused on a lot on the affixes and the root. This is kind of what I wanted them to take away from it. Just identify the prefix, the root, and the suffix. Kind of know the difference in all of the morphemes. And then also that there are morphemes that have no meaning, really. For example, the last part of restructure. So we know that's a suffix, but there's really no meaning, which is fine. That's, you know, that's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
But just to be able to break down the words, you know, and identify what words, what word parts they are. And then for the we do, so that was all the I do, what I just went through.
Okay.
And then for the we do, that's when I introduced the article. We read it together. Obviously, I did stop intermittently to just kind of like ask comprehension questions here and there. But we
Were
read
you
it.
reading this aloud?
We read it as a class out loud, yes.
Okay.
So in a breakout room, I had like 5 students, each kind of taking turns to read the article.
Okay.
And then we, afterwards, I highlighted 2 words from the article, and then I asked them to decompose the words. So the words were uncovered and laboratory.
Okay.
And so kind of using whatever we had done before, I asked them all to break it up. And this was more verbally, you know, than anything, because lack of time, and then just because we were virtual, so they kind of were able to decompose it, uncover, and then the ED.
So that would have been great to have that same structure that you did, the same structure that you used to model that for them. Now have an empty structure for them to be able to put those 2 words into it and break it down.
Right, yeah. I agree. And you know, so again, because we were pressed for time, it was more of like a verbal thing, but I agree. I wish we could have done the same structure just so that they can see that. And then for the you-do, I didn't get to this with them. We ran out of time, but I did have worksheets prepared to have them just independently work on different words and breaking different terms. Oh no, first I would have had them define morpheme, prefix, root, and suffix. I would have had them give the definition, characteristics, and provide a few examples. And then share out loud so that we can kind of go over the answers together. And I do have, I'm going to share what I would have, what that worksheet would look like. This is the same one. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Okay, we're over our time, so just show me this one thing.
Okay.
But give you some feedback on the lesson plan, and then we need to close.
Yeah, it's not even working. It's not sharing what I wanted to share, so we can just move on.
Okay, you put the lesson plan back up there, the one that you were just showing us. That's funny. I said, now if I said 9 to 12, people are like, I'm not gonna be on a Zoom all day on a Saturday. And then now we probably actually need to be 9 to 12. Go all the way back to the beginning. Okay, you have 5 objectives there. You have 5 objectives.
Okay.
So students will be able to define, boom, from a not. Students will be able to infer, boom. That's your second objective. Students will be able to define a word by identifying prefixes. That's your third one. Students will be able to define a word by identifying the root. That's your fourth one. Students will be able to identify a word by identifying the suffixes. There's your fifth objective.
Okay.
Okay.
So you
Five
mean
different objectives. Okay. And scroll up for me just a little bit. And so just like we identified that in the we do, just to be, just to look through here and see, again, where could you make that more, like I said, where they're more involved. At the end of that I do, we already kind of identified in the we do where that could happen. And what I would have liked to have seen in that you do is now for them to take any unfamiliar words in that story and actually use the strategy that you just taught, the morphology. Because I'm sure they encountered some other words in that story as they were reading out loud that were unfamiliar. They may have used context clues to figure it out so that, they wouldn't be embarrassed in the midst of the reading or relying on a peer. But now choose 3 or 4, quantify it, unfamiliar words from the story, use morphology to break it down.
Okay.
And assess their application of being able to identify the prefix, the root, and all of that with the words that are unfamiliar for them. And then not only are you seeing the demonstration of their learning, but what they're now have figured out or have practiced how to use that strategy to do what? To independently promote their own learning, right? When they're reading on their own.
Okay, that makes sense.
Fabulous. So now you just took a really great lesson plan to excellent, right? In 5 minutes. Look how we did that. But excellent lesson. I'm glad to see people still taking the time to teach, to actually teach this instead of just giving a worksheet and saying, this is what you do. So I'm glad that you're taking the time to do that. Just get some more physical involvement with that, have them doing something a little bit, actually using those charts earlier in the lesson, and then now make it real for them, make it relevant for them. Now use it to support your own learning. Yep. Fabulous teaching, Sandy. I like it. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for having the courage to share, because this wasn't a class. You didn't have to. And so when we have the courage to do that, to come out of our comfort zone, that's where you elevate yourself to the next level of professionalism. And so I appreciate everything that you all have contributed today. I appreciate you taking time out of a Saturday to try to, again, do something that was not required, but something that I hope will elevate your thinking or brush the cobwebs off of the way you used to think and you haven't in a while, either because you're burned out or, like I said, we just get complacent and just kind of the doing of teaching, right? And we've all been guilty of it, myself included. So thank you again for your participation. I hope that we've met the goals for today, some more effective lesson planning, some more accurate objective writing, some better connections to our assessment, and more active learning, requiring our students to be active participants in the learning process and not just sit there and be Zoom attendees. Okay, thank you so much. And like I said, I will send the PowerPoint out. If you email me, kgarrett@dom.edu, I will be glad to share the PowerPoint with you so you have those charts in there. Okay. Thank you, Aaliyah. Thank you, Sandy, Montserrat. It was nice meeting both of you ladies. Thank you, Terry and Latrice, for joining me. And Dr. Silvers, thank you so much, as always, for your support.
Thank you so much. It was excellent.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Garrett, thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, you ladies have a good rest of the day.
You have a good weekend.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right.